The night was quiet in the small town of Willow Bend. The rain came softly against the roof, steady and cold. Inside the small house, Claire moved slowly through the dim light. She did not turn on the lamps. She did not want to wake anyone. Her steps were light, careful, almost like she was a shadow. On the table was a half-eaten sandwich and a cup that still smelled faintly of coffee. Claire looked at them for a long time. She had made up her mind. She could not stay any longer. Her heart was full of feelings she could not explain. Every day with Daniel had been safe, kind, warm, and that was why it frightened her the most. She had learned long ago that warmth often came before pain. She had trusted before, and it had left her feeling empty. So now she told herself that leaving quietly was the right thing to do. Lily, her little girl, was asleep in the small room down the hall. Claire glanced at the door, her heart aching at the thought of waking her. She went to the closet and took the small duffel bag that she had packed that afternoon while Daniel was out fixing the fence behind the house. She had folded Lily's pink jacket and her favorite worn-out storybook. There was not much else to take. It's just a few clothes, a little money, and a need to start over. Her hand shook as she pulled on her worn coat. The clock on the wall ticked with a slow sound that felt louder than the rain. She looked around the small kitchen. Even after the months of staying there, it felt strange to call it home. Daniel had built this place with his own hands, from the creaking wooden floors to the strong porch that faced the fields. He had given them more than a roof. He had given safety. He had given the kind of quiet care that frightened her because it made her hope again. Just as she reached for the door handle, a small voice came from behind her. "Mama, where are we going?" Claire froze. She turned and saw Lily rubbing her eyes, her small feet bare against the cold floor. Her soft hair stuck to her cheeks. Claire knelt quickly and held her close. "We have to go, sweetie," she whispered. "We're going to find a new place." Lily frowned in the sleepy way children do when they don't understand something big. "Is Daniel coming?" she asked. Claire felt the sting behind her eyes. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell her daughter that Daniel would always be with them in some way. But instead, she said no, not this time. Lily looked past her through the window, where the faint light of morning was just beginning to show. "He will be sad," she said softly. The words fell into the quiet kitchen like tiny stones, heavy and true. Claire pressed her lips to Lily's hair. "He won't notice," she whispered more to herself than to the child. Lily didn't argue. She only leaned into her mother's arms, trusting that whatever path they took would be safe. Claire wished she could believe that. She opened the door and a chill slipped in. The mist made the front yard look like a dream fading away. Their old car sat waiting by the road. Claire looked back once more at the table. There were 2 plates from the night before, one still holding crumbs of bread and bits of scrambled eggs. She thought of Daniel sitting there every morning, quiet but thinking deeply about everything. He never pushed. He never asked about her past. Maybe he already knew more than she had said. When their car engine started, it sounded too loud, as if the whole town would wake up. Claire drove slowly down the dirt road. The wipers moved back and forth, cutting the rain into neat lines. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road, but her thoughts wandered behind her to the house she was leaving. Every few minutes she glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel running after them, but the street behind her stayed empty. Lily had fallen asleep again, her small hand clutching the pink jacket in her lap. Claire reached over and touched it gently. She tried to tell herself that this was the right thing to do, that she was protecting both of them. Yet a part of her felt like she was tearing something good apart before it had the chance to grow. Back in the house, Daniel stirred in his bed. He did not yet know that the quiet inside the house was deeper than usual. The rain still touched the windows. The smell of coffee still hung in the kitchen. But there was a difference in the air that only a few hearts could feel. Claire drove on until the edge of the town disappeared behind her. She kept her hands tight on the steering wheel as the first light of morning broke through the clouds. She wanted the new day to mean a new beginning, but deep down, even as she pressed forward, a voice inside her whispered that leaving might be another kind of loss she could never unmake. Daniel woke to a strange stillness that morning. The sound of rain had faded into soft drops against the roof. He stretched, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and felt a cool emptiness in the house. Something was missing. It was not a clear thought at first, just a quiet unease that settled deep inside him. He swung his legs off the bed and stood still for a moment, listening. Normally, he would hear the faint hum of the kettle or the whisper of Claire moving around the kitchen. But now, there was nothing. Only silence. He walked slowly down the short hall and into the kitchen. The floorboards creaked under his feet. The smell of rain came in through the small open window. The first thing he saw was the plate on the table. His breakfast from earlier that morning was still there. Beside it sat the cup Claire used for her tea, empty with a faint ring at the bottom. The light was dull and gray, falling softly across the room. He could feel something had changed. Then he saw her, not Claire. Lily, the little girl, was standing near the table with her hair messy from sleep. She looked small in her oversized sweater. She had one hand on the chair, and her big eyes fixed on the plate he had left untouched. Daniel stopped where he was, unsure of what to say. The way she looked at the plate made something twist inside him. It was not hunger, it was confusion, maybe even fear. "Hey, morning," he said softly. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. "You hungry?" Lily blinked and nodded just a little. Right. Her lips pressed together like she was holding back words. Daniel walked to the table and sat down slowly. He cut the cooled eggs into small pieces with his fork. "You want me to warm this up for you?" he asked. She shook her head but climbed onto the chair across from him. He pushed the plate closer to her and she hesitated, then began to eat small bites. Daniel watched her for a while. Every move felt careful, as if he might scare her away with the wrong word. He wanted to ask where Claire was, but the answer was already sitting heavy in his chest. He glanced toward the counter. A folded paper lay near the coffee pot. It looked like a note. He did not reach for it yet. Could not bring himself to break the quiet. Lily set down her fork and looked up at him. "Mama said we were going somewhere," she said in a tiny voice. "But she is not here." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know," he said. His throat felt tight. Maybe she needed to go for a little while. The girl frowned and swung her feet under the chair. She looked like she wanted to believe him, but did not. Her hand still rested on the edge of the plate. The fork was too big for her small fingers, so he cut another piece and handed it to her. They sat there for a long time as the clock ticked on the wall. The house felt too big for just the two of them. Daniel thought of the nights Claire would hum quietly while Lily drew with her crayons. He remembered how she never talked much about her past, but her eyes sometimes looked like someone waiting at a closed door. He had not asked questions, thought patience would heal what silence could not. Now he wondered if his quiet had felt like distance instead of care. Finally, Daniel reached for the folded note. His fingers hovered over it, then rested back on the table. Did not open it. There would be time for that later, as the words she left behind could wait. Right now, the little girl sitting across from him was looking at him for something else, something he was not sure he knew how to give. "It's still raining out there," he said after a while. "You want to help me feed the chickens after breakfast?" Lily looked up with a tiny spark of interest. "In the rain?" she asked. He smiled for the first time that morning. A little rain never hurt anyone. She nodded carefully, then finished the last piece of toast. When she smiled, even just a little, it softened the ache in the room. As he washed the dishes, Daniel could feel her eyes on him. Not curious, not afraid, just watchful. He dried the plate she had used and placed it back where it belonged. He knew Claire must have felt trapped in some way he did not understand. He did not feel anger toward her, only a slow ache that came when something precious slipped quietly away. By the time they went outside, the drizzle had turned lighter. Lily wore her little rain boots and held his hand tightly. She was quiet, but her fingers gripped his as if she already knew he would not let her go. He walked with her toward the small shed where the chickens waited, the wet ground soft beneath their steps. The air smelled fresh and clean. As they stood there in the gray morning, Daniel looked back at the house. The open window fluttered slightly with the breeze. Single curtains swayed like a wave, gentle, uncertain, alive. He could not see Claire, but he felt her absence like air pulled from the room. He looked down at Lily, who was smiling at a hen scratching the dirt. Daniel bent down and helped her sprinkle corn, careful and steady. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. As long as she was staring at his plate that morning, he could not let her feel alone. The rain stopped by the time Claire reached the edge of the town. The sky was still heavy with gray clouds, and the road stretched far ahead, long and empty. Water splashed under the tires as she drove, her hands holding tight to the steering wheel. Lily was still asleep beside her, her head resting against the seat, her small mouth open as she breathed softly. The sight made Claire's chest ache with something she could not name. She wanted to believe she was doing the right thing. She wanted to believe that leaving was strength, not fear. The car heater hummed softly, but her fingers still trembled. Every road sign she passed felt like a question she could not answer. She thought about Daniel, standing in the kitchen with that quiet face of his, the way he always seemed to notice things without speaking. He knew when she was tired and would hand her a cup of coffee without asking. He knew when Lily was restless and would distract her with a small toy or a story about the animals outside. It was the kind of kindness that came slow but stayed strong. It was also the kind that scared Claire deeply. She had known men before who spoke sweetly at first and turned cold later. She had learned to run before the hurt came. Maybe that was why running felt safer than staying. She told herself it was better to go now before Daniel saw the broken parts of her heart. She whispered in her mind that he would be fine, that Lily would forget that she was saving everyone trouble. But the lie grew heavy each mile she drove. The highway curved through rows of wet trees that looked like shadows. Claire's reflection in the side window looked pale and uncertain. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, and her hair clung to her neck. She imagined Daniel waking up, finding the note she had left, and reading the words she had written while her hands shook. She had written that he was kind and that she was grateful, but that she could not stay anymore. She had ended it with a small sorry. The word looked too small on the page to carry what it meant. She reached a small gas station and pulled over. The clock on the dashboard said it was almost 8. She stepped out of the car and stretched, feeling the cold air bite her skin. She filled the gas tank slowly, watching the rainwater on the ground shimmer under the lights. A man came out of the station with a steaming paper cup of coffee and nodded at her in greeting. Claire nodded back, but did not speak. She paid him for the gas, bought Lily a small carton of milk, and returned to the car. Lily woke as she closed the door. "Are we there yet?" she asked sleepily. "Not yet, baby," Claire said, handing her the milk. "We still have a long drive." Lily drank quietly, then looked out the window. "I like Daniel," she said softly, as if she were thinking aloud. Claire looked at her daughter's face and felt her throat tighten. "I know you do," she said. "Daniel is nice. Will he miss us?" Lily asked. Claire took a deep breath. "Maybe," she said. She wanted to say more, but could not. Her voice felt locked inside her chest. They drove on again, and the road began to climb a small hill lined with tall oaks. The clouds started to break, and sunlight pushed through in thin rays, lighting the valley ahead. It was beautiful, the kind of view that could make someone feel hopeful. Yet to Claire, it only made her feel more lost. The world looked open, but she did not know where to go. She had no one waiting for her, no new home, no plan beyond the next town. Freedom did not feel light, it felt lonely. Back in Willow Bend, Daniel stood outside his porch, his hands deep in his pockets. The rain had left the ground soaked, and the earth smelled fresh. The small note Claire left was still inside on the table. He had read it once, quietly, without anger, then folded it and placed it back down. He had expected it, in a way. He had seen it in her eyes the night before she left. The look of someone halfway out the door already. He turned his gaze toward the road that led out of town. Somewhere beyond that stretch of wet gravel, she was driving away. He imagined her biting her lip as she drove, imagined Lily asking her questions, imagined her trying not to cry. Part of him wanted to run after her, to tell her that she did not need to fix herself to stay, that not all care would hurt her. But another part of him knew that chasing her would only push her farther, so he stayed. The neighbors waved as he walked to the fence gate. He waved back faintly. Lily's laughter from earlier in the day still echoed in his mind. He would take care of the chickens, keep the house warm, and wait for as long as he needed. He did not know if she would come back. He only knew that he hoped she would, not because he wanted to change her, but because she deserved to know that love could be simple and stay even after fear tried to make it vanish. Somewhere down the long road, as the car rolled past another mile marker, Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She did not know that behind her, Daniel was standing on the porch, looking at the faint line of the road like it was a promise. She did not know that sometimes the road away could turn into the road back again. By the time the sun began to set that evening, the day had grown quiet. The storm clouds had moved away, leaving the air cool and still. Daniel sat on the porch with a mug of coffee that had gone cold. The wood beneath his feet creaked softly each time he shifted his weight. He had spent the day working outside, fixing a broken fence post and brushing the mud off the steps. It kept his hands busy even though his mind stayed on one thing. Claire. He had told himself she might come back, but he also knew she might not. People who carried heavy memories sometimes could not stay in one place for too long. He understood that. Still, each sound of a passing car down the road made him turn his head just to look, as though the sight of her old car might finally appear again. Inside the house, Lily was drawing at the kitchen table. She had found her box of crayons and a few sheets of paper. The picture she made showed 3 stick figures holding hands near a small house. When Daniel walked inside, she looked up and smiled. "I made us," she said proudly. Daniel bent down and studied the picture. "That's nice," he said with a gentle smile. "Who's that in the middle?" "That's Mama," Lily said. "She is holding our hands." For a moment, Daniel could not speak. He only nodded and placed his large hand on the top of her small head. "She liked that," he said quietly. "She'll like that a lot." Outside the window, the last strip of sunlight touched the trees at the far edge of the field. The orange glow looked like fire, but soft and calm. Daniel went to close the window, but he stopped when he saw a thin cloud of dust in the distance. His breath caught for a second. The sound of an engine came faintly through the still air. He felt his heart pick up a beat, though he did not want to believe it yet. Lily came up beside him, following his gaze. "Is that Mama's car?" she asked, pressing her small face against the glass. Daniel did not answer at first. He watched carefully as the shape of the car grew clearer, moving slowly down the long dirt road that led to his house. His heartbeat sounded loud in his ears. He wanted to walk out to meet her, but he stayed still. If she had come back, he wanted her to have the choice to step out on her own. The car stopped near the porch. The engine turned off, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the door opened, and Claire stepped out. The wind caught her hair, and she brushed it from her face. Eyes looked uncertain, almost shy. But there was something else too. The exhaustion had softened into relief. Daniel moved down the steps slowly. He stopped a few feet away from her. They looked at each other, and neither spoke. Lily ran past him with a bright cry, her boots kicking up bits of gravel. She threw her arms around Claire's waist, and Claire bent low, holding her daughter tight. The sound of Lily's laugh filled the space, making the silence between the adults easier to bear. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You're back," he said simply. Claire lifted her eyes to his. "I couldn't keep going," she said. "I thought I could, but I couldn't." Daniel nodded once. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "You're here." "That's enough." Claire took a small step closer. Her face showed the weight of the journey, the tiredness of someone who had fought with herself and lost in the best way. "I didn't leave because of you," she said softly. "I left because sometimes I don't know how to stay. I get scared when things feel good. I start waiting for them to fall apart." Daniel looked down, then lifted his gaze again. "Things don't have to fall apart," he said. "Sometimes they can stay good if both people keep trying." She looked at him for a long time before nodding. "I believe you," she said, though her voice sounded unsure. Lily tugged on Daniel's hand and then on her mother's. "We're all here now," she said. "Can we eat dinner?" Her simple words broke through the last of the tension. Daniel smiled, and even Claire laughed quietly. They went inside together. The kitchen was warm from the stove where Daniel had left soup heating in case Lily got hungry. He took down 3 bowls from the shelf and poured the soup in. Claire sat at the table with Lily beside her, their shoulders touching. For a moment, things felt ordinary in the best way. Lily told them about drawing pictures. Daniel talked about the fence he fixed, and Claire listened with a calm she had not felt in a long time. Every sound, the clatter of spoons, the hum of the kettle, the faint whistle of wind outside, felt right. Later, after Lily fell asleep on the couch, Daniel and Claire stood near the door. The night outside was quiet again, and the stars had begun to show faintly. "I don't know what happens now," she said. "We start from where we are," he said. "That's all we can do." She nodded. She looked around the small house, her gaze resting on the table where they had eaten and on the sleeping girl curled under a blanket. For the first time in a long while, Claire did not feel like running. She felt like breathing, and that was enough for the night. Weeks passed in the small house, and the air began to grow warmer as spring arrived. The days grew longer, and the fields around Willow Bend turned green again. The morning started slowly, with soft light coming through the windows and the smell of coffee in the kitchen. Life had found a gentle rhythm. There were still quiet spaces where old fears tried to creep in, but they were smaller now, more like whispers than storms. Every morning, Claire would wake early and help Daniel with small chores outside. They would feed the chickens, sweep the porch, and sometimes walk together down to the old oak tree near the end of the lane. Their words stayed simple. They talked about the weather, about Lily's drawings, and about what to plant in the small garden behind the house. Claire did not say much about the past anymore. Daniel never asked her to. He had learned that trust grows best in silence that feels safe. Lily, on the other hand, filled the quiet house with energy. She ran through the grass chasing butterflies, leaving her laughter behind her like sunshine. Sometimes she would come running to Daniel with her small hands full of flowers and say they were for Mama. Claire would smile and tuck the wildflowers into a jar by the window. It became their small ritual. Every few days, a new bunch appeared, bright and alive, keeping the home full of color. Still, there were moments when Claire would sit by herself on the porch in the evenings, holding a cup of tea, staring into the horizon. Daniel noticed those times, but never interrupted. He knew she was learning to be still again, learning not to fear the peace that once frightened her. She had spent so many years preparing to run that staying felt strange, but each night she stayed made her stronger. One evening, after dinner, Lily went to bed early. The air smelled of rain again, though the sky was clear. Claire and Daniel sat outside watching the lightning bugs blink among the trees. The silence between them had changed since the night she returned. It was no longer heavy, it felt warm. "I used to think I was not meant for stillness," she said quietly, her voice soft. "When things stayed good for too long, I waited for the moment it would break. I thought if I left first, it would hurt less." Daniel looked at her, but did not speak right away. He let her words settle like small stones in water. Then he said, "You can't stop things from changing, but you can choose to stay when it matters." Claire nodded, her eyes on the open field. "I am trying," she said. "Every day I tell myself to stop preparing for the worst. Sometimes I still feel like I might fail." He smiled gently. "Everyone fails sometimes. What matters is that you keep choosing to stay." She turned her face toward him, and for the first time, there was no wall in her eyes. There was only calm, the kind that comes when someone stops fighting the truth. The next morning brought sunlight so bright it filled the kitchen with gold. Lily sat at the table with her crayons again. She was drawing 3 figures standing under a tree. She showed it to Daniel proudly. "Look," she said, "we are all holding hands. See, Mama is smiling." Claire was by the stove stirring oatmeal, laughed when she looked at the picture. "Yes, lovely," she said. Daniel smiled and tapped the table lightly. "You've got a real artist here," he said. The little girl beamed with pride. Her joy filled the room in a way that made everything feel whole. Later that day, Daniel fixed a loose shutter outside while Claire hung laundry on the line. The wind carried the sound of children playing down the road. The smell of the soil mixed with faint traces of blossoms from the nearby trees. Everything felt ordinary, and that was what made it perfect. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Claire stood for a moment and watched Daniel work. There was something deeply peaceful in the way he moved, steady and sure. She realized how much had changed since the morning she tried to leave. The fear that once ruled her heart had begun to fade. She still had scars inside, old and tender, but they did not guide her anymore. When Daniel looked up and caught her watching, she smiled. It was not the kind of smile that hides sorrow, but one that carries quiet gratitude. He walked over and stood beside her, wiping his hands on his jeans. "This feels like home now," she said softly. "It always was," he replied. "You just had to see it." That night, they ate dinner together at the same table where her story had once meant running away. The light was warm on their faces. Lily told him a story about a dream she had, one where they all lived inside a big treehouse full of stars. They laughed, not because the story was funny, but because it felt safe to laugh. When the dishes were done and the house had gone still, Claire sat by the window watching the stars outside. Daniel passed behind her quietly and placed a blanket over her shoulders. She looked up at him and nodded, a silent thank you. There were no big words, no promises spoken that night. There was only the simple truth of three people sharing one small home, bound not by fear or need, but by the quiet thread of care that had grown between them. It was not a grand kind of love, not the one written about in songs, but it was real. It was the kind that stayed.